On this edition of Independent Sources, Polishing the Parade, a new board takes on the task of revitalizing one of the largest cultural events in the country.
If we held the Corps accountable for putting our flag on the can, then we have to hold ourselves accountable for how we represent that flag.
And a reading revolution in East Harlem, fostering literacy and community by embracing books.
We can discuss, have things changed in our community, have they not? What is still the same? And how has a young lord, how have they influenced East Harlem and history?
Those stories and more coming up on Independent Sources. Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. The last year has been turbulent, to say the least, for the organizers of the National Puerto Rican Day Parade. At one point, it was uncertain whether the event would even happen this spring. Just a few months ago, the board of the nonprofit organization that stages the parade was disbanded under a shroud of impropriety. The New York Attorney General found that the parade's marketing manager had defrauded it of millions of dollars and lied about the amount paid in scholarship money to students. The dispute became very public when some community activists reprimanded the board for allowing the Coors Brewing Company to emblazon the Puerto Rican flag on a beer can. They charged that it sent the wrong message about their culture. Now, a new board has been charged with undoing that damage and polishing the parade's image. I spoke with one of the new board members, Orlando Plaza, about how they intend to do that. So Orlando, why did you join the board?
The Puerto Rican Day Parade is an extremely important institution in our community. It's the biggest ethnic parade, perhaps in the country. For very many years, it had gone in different directions. I felt that if there was an opportunity to affect change, that I was duty-bound to agree. And I think that was the major thing. Besides, then I would always, if I did not agree, had I decided not to do it, then I would have forever forfeited my right to complain about it.
The whole board is new, right? New members. Were there any holdovers from the last board?
There were 3 holdovers, 2 resigned after the first or 2 board meetings, and then we have only 1 holdover left. So there's now 13 members total, okay. 1 left from the old board.
So now you're tasked with changing direction of the parade. How do you hope to restore the integrity of the parade, this most important cultural icon institution in the city?
That was the key, one of the key points in our mission, was to restore the integrity of the parade. And how we're doing that is to full transparency.
For instance?
Well, you know, there are no backroom deals. Everything is on the table. Anything that we have at the end of this, we will hand in a report to the Attorney General, clearly detailing where the money went, where it was spent, how it was spent, so on and so forth. We take our fiduciary responsibility very seriously on this board. We have a wonderful accountant on the board who's one of the board members, Rosa Gutierrez, and she's doing an amazing job.
Besides the financial accountability, what else are you doing to get people to feel that, hey, this is a well-run board organization and they should come out to celebrate Puerto Rican Day? Well,
you know, we had a series of events that we have put together. When we first sat down, we had to decide what events we were going to keep and which ones we were going to get rid of. We kept two of the events that we decided to keep. We just had this past week. One of them was the 152nd Street Festival. It was wonderful to see that changed in and of itself. There are several things. If we kept it, we decided to tweak it. And one way we tweaked it, for instance, is that we opened up a children's pavilion. The sponsor there was Home Depot. Well, Home Depot had provided volunteers and materials, and they taught children how to use tools and how they created little projects. One of them was to create a little helicopter out of wood. and these are the kind of things that we felt were missing in that past event that we were able to include in this one. And we've held several press conferences detailing what we plan to do and what we're going to do. We had a large press conference in New York not that long ago. We had one in Puerto Rico a couple of weeks ago.
Why Puerto Rico?
Well, because it's the connection to Puerto Rico. As you know, in the Puerto Rican community and the diaspora in general, the connection to Puerto Rico is very is a very real link. We have to always acknowledge our homeland, even though we may not have even been born there. But that is the dynamic of the Puerto Rican.
Sure.
No?
It's very similar to what's happening now, living in feet into world. Although we're here, but we always have to pay homage to the motherland.
Exactly. It's no different. I mean, for some of us, those connections are closer than others. I mean, there are very many of us that grew up going back to Puerto Rico during the summers, for instance. Very similar dynamic now exists in the Dominican community as well. So the ties to Puerto Rico are extremely close. And the parade helps to cement that. There's always a town, for instance, in Puerto Rico that's honored.
You know, one of the things that people don't understand, or one of the things that was lost the last several years, the parade is sort of like this cultural bond between, for New Yorkers, as you know, they're called here, and that was lost somewhat. What steps are you taking to restore the cultural as opposed to the commercialism that got the parade into trouble?
That's a wonderful question, Gary. One of the things that we did was that we insisted that that the people who participated on the floats, for instance, the people who had the floats, which is usually the most visual element of the parade, is the floats, just by virtue of their size.
They're decorative too.
Right, and they're decorative. So that we insisted that there be a cultural theme incorporated in the float, that either it could either be cultural or historical, but it had to be something on that float that identified Puerto Rican culture. And also in a dignified manner. That's another thing we created. We created a list of, like I call it the commandments. You know, there are certain things that have happened in the past, and I don't want to dwell on the past, but there were certain representations of the flag that were inappropriate. So we now have a sheet that we developed with certain rules and regulations, and all the contingents, whether they be on foot or on a float, had to sign it.
You also have the music element, where you have the music trucks, and talk about that a bit. I know back in the days, Fat Joe, you should be one of the big draw, has a huge float. Who are we likely to see, the big musical guys? The
big musical guy we're going to see this year is unquestionably Calle 13, Rene, to be more specific. That's going to be pretty exciting. He normally would not have participated in something like this, but I think, at least it's my understanding, that one of the things that convinced him to participate was the recognition of Oscar Lopez.
And who is, for those of us who don't know?
Oscar Lopez is a Puerto Rican political prisoner that has been in jail for over 33 years for what the United States called seditious conspiracy. And as a movement afoot, has been around for a long time, but has gathered momentum. What was once the cause of, let's say, left-leaning Puerto Ricans or nationalist Puerto Ricans has now become a humanitarian cause.
Okay, cool. Now, earlier you mentioned about how the flag can be represented. I mean, what brought all this to a head was when they let Coors Beer use the flag on the bottle, on the can. So now, what are some of can you give us a little bit more specifics on how the flag cannot be used, for instance?
All right, you cannot wear it as a do-rag. You cannot have a flag, for instance, with another image on it. For instance, like one of the national symbols is the coqui, the tree frog, Caribbean tree frog. A flag is not supposed to have any of these symbols on it. We have to, if we held Coors accountable for putting our flag on the can, then we have to hold ourselves accountable for how we represent that flag. up until the 1950s. It's a matter of fact, throughout the 40s and 50s, there was a law in Puerto Rico called La Ley de la Mordaza, and in that law, you were not allowed.
Can you translate that?
It was like a gag law,
a gag order.
A gag order, kind of. You couldn't speak about Puerto Rican independence. You could not speak about self-determination, and you could not fly the Puerto Rican flag.
Oh, okay.
So I think when we look at the historical context, we have to remember those who sacrificed for that right.
And then you felt it was the essence of the parade had been trivialized last several years.
Yeah, I mean, there's a way to participate that is, I get it. It's a celebration, but we can celebrate in a dignified manner, and we can do so in a way that advances our culture.
What is your goal for the future? I mean, this year you're going to restore, get all these rules in place. What do you want to see moving forward?
We want to see the parade continue to grow. We want to see our culture continue to advance. But one of the more important things that we are doing is that we have created a scholarship fund. Now, there was always supposed to be a scholarship fund.
The students never got the money.
Yeah, I don't know what the details of that were, but there was always some questions around it. So this year we raised $30,000, and now we have to view that within the context of the time frame that we had. 8 weeks is what we had to put on one of the biggest parades that this country has. So we were able in those 8 weeks to raise $30,000, and we look forward to continue to seeing that grow. We hope that triple, if not quadruple, what we raised this year in the upcoming years. And that's a very exciting element to me.
Well, good luck, and thank you for joining us, Orlando.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Thank you for having me.
This year's Puerto Rican Day Parade will be held on June 8th. Still to come on the show, a campaign to foster literacy and community in East Harlem. Before that, Abby Ishola has some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic and community media. From El Diario La Prensa, members of the Latino Muslim community say they're still being watched by the New York Police Department. Last month, the NYPD announced that it would end its surveillance of the Muslim community. But one Latino Muslim woman told El Diario La Prensa the police followed her recently. Other members of the city's Muslim community say they still live in fear of being watched and being harmed by police. The Amsterdam News reports that students in New Jersey are speaking out against a new school reorganization plan. Several students recently staged an overnight sit-in protest to urge officials to throw out the proposed plan titled One Newark. The plan is being backed by Newark School Superintendent Cami Anderson. It will turn elementary schools into early childhood centers, while other schools would be relocated to underused facilities. The plan also calls for more charter schools that currently only serve 20% of Newark students. Community organizations have proposed another plan called the Newark Promise Plan that calls for improvements in the school district. One Newark is scheduled to go into effect this fall. From the Hunts Point Express, the history of the Bronx is the subject of one New York City tour led by an environmentalist and historian. Bronx River Sankofa is a research project designed by Morgan Powell. The project includes tours around the Bronx, in which he covers over 300 years of African American history in the borough. Powell recently expanded the tour by adding a bit of Latino history and that community's contribution to the Bronx. Voices of New York profiled one man who's on a quest to become the next mayor of New York City. Korean-American architect Hee-Jin Lee has already run for mayor 3 times, but he plans to run again in 2017. According to Voices of New York, Lee is quite unknown among Koreans. During his last bid for mayor in 2013, only a few Korean community leaders supported him. He was also only able to raise a little over $25,000 for his campaign. But Lee says as an architect and an immigrant from South Korea, he knows what needs to be done to improve the quality of life in the city. A part of his campaign platform is to build better housing 2 miles from the East River so people can buy property closer to Manhattan. And finally, Reading Rainbow may be making a comeback. Colorlines reports that LeVar Burton, the host of the popular children's program from the 1980s, launched a fundraiser on the crowdfunding site Kickstarter. His goal was to raise $1 million. He exceeded his goal in less than 24 hours. Burton says bringing Reading Rainbow back could help address illiteracy among children. His goal is to make the new Reading Rainbow more of a digital platform available to all children in classrooms and at homes via several platforms, including the web, mobile phones, game consoles, and set-top boxes such as Roku and Apple TV. Those were just a few headlines from New York's ethnic and community media. Independent Sources will be back right after this.
Thanks for staying tuned. One independent bookstore owner in East Harlem hopes to promote literacy and foster a greater sense of community with a new campaign called One Book One Barrio. The initiative will be officially launched on Saturday, June 7th at the independent bookstore La Casa Azul. Sarah Pizon spoke with the campaign coordinator, Aurora Anaya-Cerda, and with Sonia Manzano, who is best known as Maria on Sesame Street, is the author of the first book that will be read in the inaugural year of the campaign.
Aurora, why did you start the campaign One Book One Barrio at your bookstore in East Harlem?
The idea of starting a campaign around one particular book comes from a national campaign where communities throughout the country in libraries and bookstores all gather around one story to talk about that and have programming around it. So for us, One Book One Barrio is that campaign just narrowed down to East Harlem to talk about one particular story that focuses specifically on our community.
And what do you hope to accomplish with the program?
Many things. One, of course, is to have more people discover La Casa Azul and know about the programming that takes place in our bookstore. Also, of course, to talk about the book, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, because there are many wonderful things that can be discussed in terms of the text, in terms of the fact that it takes place in the 60s, and we can discuss the Young Lords and their contributions to our community in East Harlem.
And Sonia, what does it mean to you to be part of this project?
Well, it's my book, so I'm very happy to promote The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, of course. And it takes place in 1969 in El Barrio. It's a coming-of-age story of a young 14-year-old girl and the impact that an activist group called the Young Lords has on her and her family. And it's 1969 is when it takes place, when a lot of important things happen in the country. The whole country was in an uproar, civil rights, students taking over the Columbia University, and this is a little story about that very idealistic time in American culture. That took place in El Barrio.
And why did you think this was a good idea for a book?
Well, it was emotional. I remembered that time, though I was a little older than my protagonist, but I remember going to El Barrio and feeling kind of a change was in the air, and I thought that would be a compelling story to put in a book.
And tell us about the audience that you're trying to target with this.
Well,
this
it's
book.
interesting. You'll talk about something that happened in 1969 to young people, and you might as well talk about the Crusades. It seems like such a long time ago. But I think that kids now need to hear stories about how they have power and they can change communities and they can have an impact. And it's an exercise in critical thinking, which is one of my issues. I think I always talk about critical thinking when I can. And some kids have said to me, well, were the Young Lords good or bad? And I go, oh, now there's a question. Maybe you have to figure out, bring your life experience to what these people did, and you decide if it was, a good way to go about achieving something.
So who are the Young Lords?
The Young Lords were an activist group who fashioned themselves after the Black Panthers in 1969. They went into the Puerto Rican community, and they also decided that they had to stand up for their civil rights. Everybody else in America was doing it, but not the Latino community in New York, not as much as they were on the West Coast. So here in the East Coast, they decide to kind of stand up for Latino rights, and the garbage was not being picked up in El Barrio with the frequency that it was being picked up in other neighborhoods. So they went around and they asked the community, what could we do to stand up for our rights? Free Puerto Rico. The community said, no, get this garbage cleaned up. So that was the first thing they did. They set the garbage on fire in order to, they went through the usual channels first, didn't get any satisfaction. They set the garbage on fire. All of a sudden, Puerto Ricans are in the newspaper, and the sanitation department came and said, oh my goodness, everybody knows that we're not serving this community well. So it really brought a light to El Barrio. I remember seeing like, oh my goodness, we're in the daily news, you know, not El Diario. We were sort of in a mainstream newspaper more, and it was a big moment.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about your heroine. What's so important about her?
She's going through what a lot of 14-year-old girls go through. They don't like themselves. She doesn't like that she's Puerto Rican. She feels marginalized, but I think there's humor in it. She doesn't like that she's Puerto Rican the way that the girl in My Big Fat Greek Wedding, she says she didn't like being Greek because she was the only fourth grader with sideburns. So she's going through that whole self-conscious change that adolescents go through. And then she has a role model in a wild grandmother, and her docile mother is her other role model, and she's torn between which way to go. And I hope if there's a lesson in it or a theme is that you can take from both worlds. Your crazy grandmother and your docile mother are both important to you.
So Aurora, why did you really choose this book with this incredible hero?
Aside from what Sonia just said, you know, the fact that it's a young adult book, and we work very closely with many local schools. And this is a book that we can talk to educators about and say, we can bring this into your classrooms. You can have your students come to our store, and we can have conversations about this. We can talk about what happened in 1969 in El Barrio, the fact that the bookstore is on 103rd Street, just 10 blocks away from many of these activities where they took place. And we can discuss, have things changed in our community? Have they not? What is still the same? And how has a young lord, how have they influenced East Harlem and history?
But an important thing to mention is that there were a lot of wonderful things and not so wonderful things in El Barrio in '69. But one thing that there wasn't was a bookstore. That's for sure. So kudos to Aurora here, who has worked so hard to get a bookstore. In these times of Amazon and all of that, to have a bookstore in that community is really great.
Right. All right. You have your bookstore is the sole independent bookstore in East Harlem. So why is this so important to you today?
We are the only independent bookstore, and we just turned 2. So we're very lucky, and we're very fortunate that East Harlem community and New York City really has supported us since the very beginning. It's important for me because I'm a former educator. I'm an artist, and books changed my life. It was books written by Latino writers that really had a tremendous impact in what I do now as an educator. And to see now that we can have a space like La Casa Azul that didn't exist when I was growing up, and have so many parents come in and say, I wish Casa Azul existed when I was a child. Here are books that I can share with my children that reflect the Latino history and Latino culture, and have them be proud, so that Evelyn would have been proud of where she came from if she had these role models when she was younger.
Yeah, it seems your bookstore is much more than a bookstore. Tell us how you engage the community at your bookstore.
It is, and many people say that. They say, wow, it's only been 2 years. We feel like you've been here for much longer. And that's because of the programming that takes place. We have events that are traditional to bookstores, like book clubs and book talks, but we've also hosted language classes, even birthday parties for children. Many local schools bring their kids on field trips, and we talk about the store and the history, and the fact that La Casa Azul was crowdfunded. I raised $40,000 in 40 days a few years ago to be able to open the store. So that was money that didn't come from a bank. It wasn't money that I had. It was money that came from over 500 people in the community that said, East Harlem needs an independent bookstore. Here's the money that you need to be able to open that store.
And so when is the launch of your program?
We launch One Book One Barrio this Saturday at the store at 1 o'clock. Sonia will be reading from the book, and it will be great to see everyone there to support our campaign.
She'll be signing books too?
I will be signing books, so please tell everybody to come and say hello.
And how long will the program last? It's going to be there for a while.
It's an entire year. So One Book campaign, this is our first book. It launches in June, and it goes through May of 2015.
What do you see the future of One Book One Barrio campaign looking like?
Well, the future for me with this campaign is to see a different book be chosen every year and have the community come together to discuss, to talk about these topics, right? Whether it's through photos or film, or actually having the author there to talk about the issues and have it be a legacy for La Casa Azul.
I have another question. In the book, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, the heroine is a young Latina woman.
Right.
Is there a lack of diversity in young adult novels for heroines and heroes?
Well, as a writer, and I read a lot of young adult novels, and I see a lot of books that have women, young girls in them, and young Latino girls in them, but I don't see them becoming bestsellers, being like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, that kind of magnitude. It hasn't reached that kind of magnitude. So you still have to search a bit to find them, and you know, that's why this La Casa Azul is such a great resource, because you don't have to, you know, go crazy finding them. They're right there if you want books about young Latin girls or the Latin experience in general.
Aurora, do you hope to tackle this issue of lack of diversity in young adult novels in your bookstore?
I feel like we do that every day. The fact that every book in our bookstore is by a writer of color. The fact that we promote bilingual books at La Casa Azul. And we refer to books like The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano as a classic. There are many classics out there, but for Casa Azul, we have what we want to share with future generations as classics within Latino literature.
Great. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can learn more about the One Book One Barrio campaign on the website lacasaazulbookstore.com. Sonia Manzano's book, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, is available on the website soniamanzano.com. When we come back, African fashion adds some flair to the streets of Brooklyn. Finally from us, mohawks, afros, piercings, and prints were all the rage at the recent Dance Africa Street Bazaar sponsored by the Brooklyn Academy of Music. Standout fashion is the norm at this annual event. Abby Ishola spoke to some of the attendees about how African culture inspires their style.
At the Brooklyn Academy of Music's annual Dance Africa Street Bazaar, droves of people came to enjoy street performances. They came to shop from hundreds of vendors and to express their unique sense of style.
It's nice to see people embracing the prints, the kente cloths, and just owning their own style and developing their own character.
Well, my style is really Afrocentric. It's kind of funky, it's eclectic. I pretty much just wear anything that looks good.
Wearing your hair natural is a big thing, and I saw a lot of it, but I was they did it in all different ways. I saw color, cut, and just all these interesting styles of how to wear. This is what inspired me to wear my hair. Usually I just let it out, but I was like, oh, maybe I'll try something different. Well, seeing the different fashion and the vendors, just seeing print is such a huge thing, and it's everything here is just the print, color, I think is really important.
Well, the style out here is really funky, really cultural, really Afrocentric, and I love it. It's kind of chic, couture. You got a little bit of everything out here. It's BAM. I mean, what else do you expect to see out here?
For Independent Sources, Abby Ishola.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.